Hello, I'm Marc JB and welcome to my studio. I started off in a very musical family. My grandfather, who was my mother's dad, his name was Jack Jackson, and he used to have a band back in the Dorchester and Savoy hotels. And back then, being a band leader was like being a superstar DJ. It's like being Avicii. So he was the Avicii of his time. But he then went and became a radio DJ. And before him, everyone was really quite boring. For our next song, we'll be listening to some Rachmaninoff. Please pay particular attention to the second movement. And then he came along and he cut up loads of sketches. He cut up Hancock's Half Hour with Steptoe Sons. And I remember going to his little studio that he had at his house, and he basically had a whole wall full of little bits of spliced 2-inch tape. So he had consonants, vowels, verbs, nouns, little phrases, and he combined all these things, sound effects, he combined all these things to make entirely new sketches for the BBC. So my grandfather had the world's first sample bank and pretty much invented sampling from splicing 2-inch tape. He had 10 million listeners on his show, and that was, he kind of inspired the family to be a bit different, a bit wacky. So we've all been touched some way by this crazy family musicalness. I worked in the lighting industry for a year, and then I started full-time in the studio, and playing in all the jazz bands around London. So I was the geezer sitting in the middle of the bar in all the hotels with everybody puffing on their cigars that they did back in the day, and I'll be playing all the lovely jazz tunes. And then I went on to have jazz bands, and then I thought, hang on, I could get the jazz band more gigs if I started DJing. So I started DJing, and then the DJing really kicked off. I'm going to start off by showing you a few hints, tips and secrets of all the production success that we've had with a project that I've got up. It's a deep house guitar project, and on there we've got a vocal, guitar, drums, and I'm going to show you how I use a bus in order to get sidechain pumping on as well, and why that's necessary. I'm also going to give you a few small mixing tips to get a nice, big, powerful sound that will sound good anyway. So if we look at the project here, it's all lovely colours. I do believe in having nice colours on a project because it's horrible looking at grey all day, and I have to say the nice colours was my idea for Cubase, so thank you Cubase for implementing that one. So at the top we have something I've got called a trigger. This is actually just a kick drum, and you can't hear it, but that is going off to trigger my sidechain bus. So on my projects I have all the drums and the vocals, they go straight through to the stereo outs, and then I have all the synths and bass and effects, they go through to a bus which I make a group bus called Inst, and on Inst there's a compressor. So let's go and have a look at that compressor now. Right, here is my Inst bus. Here is the channel strip for the Inst bus, and let's play the project. So if I solo that, we're going to hear we've got the bass, the guitar, and any synths that I'll be putting in later. On here I've got a compressor, and this is sidechained by this trigger at the top. So if I unmute this trigger, you'll see what this is doing is every time one of these small kick drums come along, it gives some gain reduction on this compression bus. If I make it really, you can hear now it's really pumping, but we don't really need that. So I'll just have about 6 dB. Now the reason this works so well in club music is because you want to have maximum energy at all times. If you've got the kick, which has got all the bass frequencies, and you've also got a bass line, which is also very bassy as well, at the same time, they're competing for space. So what you do is you drop the bass line out as the kick comes in, and that's what this sidechain compressor does. Every time one of my little trigger points come up here, it knocks out the audio at that little point where the kick comes in. So let's have a look here on the screen. You can see that every time a kick is coming in here, it's knocking out the sound power for the bass line. So you can hear the sound is going down every time the kick comes in. And this is great because it means that the bass frequencies from the kick are never competing with the bass frequencies from the bass line, which means that in a club, when it's mastered, it's just going to be louder, and you want things to be clear and loud. Another reason I put the synth through there, later on we'll put a string into the track. In fact, let's do that now. Let's put a string line into the track because it will make it easier to hear the effects of the side gain compression. So here I am going to be getting up a new instrument. Right, let's go for Hallian Sonic. And on here I am going to choose just some basic strings. Let's get off there. Right, 70 string machine. That sounds good. So there we have some really basic strings, but let's make them more exciting. So let's input those in. Okay. So I always work with a 4 count. I know that on some of the programs it gives you 2 bars count, but if you've been living with a 2 bar count for years and years, why don't you actually save yourself a load of time and just have a 1 bar count? Right, so here we have our string line, which is very nice and basic. I'm now going to copy that up. So let's get that string line and put it through into the inst bus, which is where we've got our sidechain compressor. So now you can really hear the effect of that because you've got a more constant sound there. So let's put the kick in and you'll hear how energy comes out. Now, one great thing about that is that a lot of club music doesn't get heard in clubs. It gets heard on really rubbish little speakers in lifts and in the ceilings of supermarkets and on workmen's radios, and they've got no bass frequencies at all. So you want to be able to have the energy, the pseudo energy, come out of the speakers. And one really good way to make it sound energetic coming out of really tiny little speakers, which is what a lot of people listen to, including little iPhone speakers, if you side gate high frequency materials like strings, it will actually make the music sound like it is energetic. It's a good trick. So here we go. Let's get that back in the mix. So let's bring that down a bit. So let's look at some of the other tracks here. I've got just a straight drum groove here that I've programmed in myself. This is something off Hallian. But what I should really do, because I've got a fatter kick here, this is one that I use quite a lot in the productions because it really cuts through the mix. But if you notice, there's a bit of a mistake here because I've got 2 kicks competing for the same bass frequency, which means that what you really want, you want to have one dominant bass frequency on your kick. So all other things should have their bass frequencies filtered out, and we did that with a high pass filter. So let's go into this drum groove here. Let's get up the channel strip. So just simply with the EQ on Cubase, we'll take out the bass there, the bass end. But what I find this does, if you take out the bass, it also takes out some of the energy of the clap. So I normally put in another parametric just to put the energy of the clap back in so you can feel it. Basically with frequencies, just to give you an idea of what they do to your body when you're in a nightclub, you can feel low bass and sub in your legs. It makes your whole body vibrate. When you have a higher kick, which is what you'd have in, say, a disco record, it kind of gets you at the bottom of your stomach. with a punchy snare, it will get you about here or there. So when you're in a nightclub, you want to have a nice low kick that's just going to make you want to feel that in your entire body. So let's put some of the low mids back in. There you are. I've now put the low mids back in the clap. So if we add the fat kick back in there, you can now see we've got a much more powerful sound because we haven't got two bass frequencies from two kick drums trying to compete with each other. So let's hear that in the mix. Lovely. Further up the track, we have got some additional elements coming in. We've got a top loop. This is very nice and clean. You can hear that there are no mid or bass frequencies, so when it comes into the mix, it just sits there on top, very sparkling. I've also got some hats from Hallian. It's always nice programming stuff by MIDI yourself because it actually makes you feel like you're making the music yourself. If you're not if you don't have any grades in your piano or you have very limited musical theory, you can just use your ears to pick out the correct samples on a sample CD and put things together. In fact, looking back at the history of house music, a lot of the good house music songs were made by people who don't have music theory, because you have a lot of clashing elements tone-wise between the vocals and the chords. So the vocals may be in the key of F, but the chords are in the key of C. But it means there's a clash and something not quite right there, but on a dance floor it sounds absolutely incredible. And talking about dance floors, this is very important. Mixing, going onto dance floors, is two completely different things. If you're mixing just to hear on a radio or listening on your stereo system at home, you probably want a nice big full sound. But when you get to a club with a massive powerful sound system, everything changes. You can hardly hear anything at all. You can hear the kick, which is the energy of the kick coming through your body. You can probably hear the bass, maybe a bit of synth or vocal, but everything else is lost in the mix. All those lovely lush reverbs you put on, all those little squeaky pads and squeaky sounds that you put on, unless they're right out in front in the mix, you ain't going to hear them when it gets to a club. My first home studio, I was really fortunate because my dad had all these shops with all this equipment and probably felt a bit guilty that he wasn't coming home and kicking a ball around the garden with me because he was working his arse off so damn hard. He bought me back a sound canvas, Roland sound canvas, Atari 1040 EST, and he had, it was Seelig Notator I think on there, which was an amazing program back in the day, but on Seelig what you had to do is compose a pattern that would repeat, and then you would tell the computer to move to the next pattern. But whenever it moved to the next pattern, there would be this slight glitch and everything would just lose its vibe. So it was absolutely rubbish for making dance music. And then over the years, I've collected different things, but now I just use a Macintosh computer, Cubase, some Mackeys for monitoring, which go really nice and deep. And it's a very simple but effective setup. Back in the day, which is probably about 20 years ago now, Seelig Notator was great, but it had its limitations. And I was trying out Cubase and Logic as well. But I found that the Logic interface was very difficult because you had to set up all of the MIDI routing and audio routing behind the scenes, and Cubase just seemed a lot better and easier to work with. So pretty much anything works these days, but I find Cubase is particularly beautifully looking and wonderful to use. So here I've actually used a really basic bass. It's an acoustic bass, and I wouldn't normally use this, but because it's got a lovely guitar track in it, it made sense to have something a bit more acoustic. Let's find some more sub-frequencies in there. On Cubase there's a very good EQ, which is a Yamaha and Cubase, Steinberg Yamaha collaboration. This is an incredibly nice, sweet and powerful plugin. I'm going to say this is one of the best EQs I've ever used. It's more like the sweet British Perkins EQ that you put up really high on the treble and it's just sizzly and sweet. It's particularly good for surgically finding frequencies. So you can hear it, it bring out the brightness of an instrument, but here we're just going to try and find a bit of a subby type frequency. So let's narrow that band a bit. So there you are. So there you are, I found a nice subby frequency, but of course when that bass is coming in because of our sidechain compressor on the bus called Inst, it's not competing with the kick drum. So you can have a really nice energy coming through the mix. Below that, I actually have the beautiful guitar sample. Now there's several things to talk about the guitar sample, but the first thing I'd like to talk about is this song is a collaboration with my friend Mike Allen, who's an amazing guitar player. I can play guitar, but I can't play it like this guy. He's absolutely amazing, an amazing singer as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about collaboration, how important it is. It's very, very easy to sit on your own in your studio, in your shed, on your laptop, on your speakers, on your headphones, and just think, yeah, I'll do the whole thing by myself. It's my thing, it's my bag. But when you collaborate with someone, you get to find out a slightly different way of working. You get to find out new ways of being inspired and being creative. You get new ideas thrown at you, they play you new music. And also, more importantly, you have somebody else's drive to find an avenue for the song. Because it's not just about making a song, it's about finding an avenue for it. That avenue might just be that you want to listen to it yourself. That avenue might be you want to get it signed up to a big record company like Toolroom or Spinning. So it's important to have an intention with a song. When you sit down and, yeah, I'm going to write a song, but where's it going to go? What's it for? Great, I'm going to make a song to play my grandma. Brilliant, easy. You don't have to do anything on Facebook. But when you're collaborating and you're thinking of doing something perhaps for Spinning Records or Toolroom, then you can go and listen to all their tunes, get all their production ideas, think about 6 months in the future, what's going through, because don't forget what you're listening to online on Spinning and Toolroom has already been through their A&R process. All this stuff was probably made 6 months back. They're now 6 months in the future, so think ahead. You know, you don't want to be copying stuff too much, more thinking of the production ideas involved and looking ahead into the future. This is where collaboration is so good, because when you've collaborated with someone, you've got their power and energy behind it as well, and they will help you push it to the right people. And it's much better to have two people hassling one A&R man than it is one. So with a guitar, let me show you the effects that I have on here. This is a beautiful plugin. This is the vintage compressor. It's very fancy and simple and aesthetic, but this is actually built into Cubase, comes with a package. So it's very simple. You have input, output, your attack, and your ratios as well. I've then got it going into the Yamaha EQ, and here you can see I've got the most outrageous boost in the high frequencies, but with this plugin you can do that. It's safe and it just gives it a bit of brightness and sweetness. And then here is one of my favourite all-time plugins. This is called Revelation. Can you hear how beautiful that sounds? This is the most fabulous reverb. It's the most crystal clear, it fits in the mix so beautifully, and when you put it on vocals, they just shimmer and widen. You can make it absolutely huge. How about that, eh? Isn't that amazing? What a reverb tail. So anyway, we'll bring it down a little bit. That's the dry guitar, and let's put about 13% or so in there. That will just give a little bit of shimmer and help it sit in the mix as well. Sometimes it's best not to wash out your mixes with reverb. The more reverb you put in, the less in your face you get. And a lot of mixes have too much reverb in them. Just try this. If you are prone to putting a little bit too much reverb in your mix, as we all are at times, just try this little trick. At the end of your project, turn all the reverb off and see what happens. In fact, if you've got everything on reverb sends, turn them all down and have a listen to your dry mix. You might actually be quite surprised that the mix is now reinvented as something that's drier, in your face. It might now sound like a top 20 song as opposed to a middle of the road song, who knows. But then you can add back in the reverb and see how much you want. And you might be shocked about how good that sounds. So here I've got some vocals. This is actually from an old track of mine called Electro Synth Kid with the fabulous Angie Brown. I just put these vocals in because they're in the same key as the guitar, just for today. For all the producers out there who haven't had training in using keyboards or guitars, etc., and you're working off samples, let me show you, if you do have keyboard or you have a plugin, how to find the correct key for something, okay? Right, so let's do it with the guitar. Right, so all you need to do is get yourself up something like a piano. Right, let's start on one key and then go down until it sounds right. That all sounding wrong. So this is in E, and that's how easy it is to find something. Just slowly go down until you actually hit the key where it sounds right, and that's how to find the key of something. One thing that I'm going to be going into another series is creative vocal effects. But today I just want to show you what I've made, and this is a little taster of what's to come. I have taken Angie Brown's vocal and I have cut it all up and I've shoved it into the drum machine that comes as part of the Cubase package, and then I've played it on the keyboard and it makes this sound here. So that's all completely dry, and in the mix sounds like that. But tune back into my next instalment to find out how we made that. Now we're going to have a look at the mixer here. So here we have the Inst bus, which has got everything going through it, which is going through the sidechain compressor. Here I have two send channels, two effect channels. One is ping pong delay and the other one is reverence reverb. To be honest, I hardly ever use them. I normally put all the effects on the channels. There's no right or wrong way of doing things. I just find it's easier for me not to have things going through an effects bus, because a lot of the time I need to bounce down stems, and on Cubase you've got an amazing function where you can just set the left and the right locator and it will give you all the stems on every single track in the same amount of time it takes to play the track, which has actually saved me days of time. And if you put your effects channels actually on the tracks themselves, then it will bounce down with the effects. So here's our fat kick, our drums groove. You can see here, this is the stereo out here, and this is showing me here what the maximum loudness is on the entire project. Now, it might sound great if you are really driving everything really hard and it is coming out at +6 dB, but that actually means that the whole thing is distorting. Now, a lot of big productions do actually distort, and maybe you want it to distort, and if it does sound great, why not distort the whole thing? But just generally as a rule of thumb, if you want everything to be nice and clean, then you need to keep below 0. 0 is called unity gain. Anything above there is distorting. So here we are. That says master peak level 2.5 dB, which is that gives us 2.5 dB of headroom. So when you're sending this off to a mastering engineer, they will probably ask you for about 4 dB of headroom there.